One of William James's most distinctive claims sounds almost too simple to be philosophical. Relations are real. But in James's radical empiricism, this sentence is doing a great deal of work. It challenges a common assumption in both philosophy and psychology, namely, that experience arrives as a set of separate items, and that the mind must later connect them by thought. James argues that this picture misdescribes what experience is actually like. The connections are not merely added afterward. The connections are part of what is directly given. To see the issue, consider how many theories implicitly treat experience as atomistic. They imagine that we receive discrete sensations, this color, that sound, this pressure, and then the intellect links them into an ordered world by applying concepts like cause, identity, similarity, and continuity. On this view, the relations are products of cognition, while the immediate data are relationless. James thinks this is not faithful to lived experience. When you attend carefully to the stream of consciousness, you do not find isolated mental atoms waiting to be glued together. You find a continuous flow in which transitions, directions, and connections are already felt. This is the heart of the claim that relations are real. For James, an empiricism worthy of the name must accept everything that is directly experienced, not only the most easily named things. And among what we directly experience are relations, and with, between, toward, because, before, after. These relations are not always experienced as explicit concepts. Often they appear as a felt continuity, a sense of passage, a direction of thought, or a fringe of meaning that binds one moment to the next. But precisely because they are felt, they are part of the empirical given. James's language of pure experience is important here. He argues that before we divide the world into inner and outer, subject and object, we begin with a more primitive, field-pure experience, out of which both mind and world are later differentiated. If you start with pure experience, then relations cannot be treated as mere intellectual additions, because they are already there in the way experience hangs together. The world is not first a pile of fragments. It is first a flow with connective tissue. In psychological terms, this fits James's stream of consciousness. A stream is defined by continuity and transition. If consciousness were a series of disconnected instants, there would be no experience of meaning across time. Language would be impossible, memory would be incoherent, and action would lack direction. The fact that we experience continuity is itself evidence that relations are given. When you hear a sentence, the meaning depends on how the words relate. Earlier words are retained. Later words reframe what came before, and a coherent thought emerges through the relations among parts. The relations are not optional. They are part of the experience of understanding. James's concept of the fringe of consciousness helps explain how many relations are experienced. The fringe is the vague but powerful surrounding sense of meaning that accompanies a focal thought. When you are trying to recall a name, you may feel a tip of a tongue relation, the sense that the answer is near, that it fits, that it would complete the thought. When you move from one idea to another, the transition is often guided by a felt relation similarity, contrast, relevance even before you can articulate it. These are experiential relations, not purely logical ones imposed after the fact. A standard objection is that even if relations are felt, they might still be mental constructions rather than features of reality. James's reply is pragmatic and empiricist. The only responsible starting point is what experience gives. If relations are part of the given, then an empiricism that excludes them is selective in the wrong way, keeps things, but discards connectors, even though both are experienced. James is not claiming that every relation we infer is correct. He is claiming that the experience of relation is real, and therefore any complete account of mind and world must include it. This claim also has consequences for the mind-world split. If relations are part of experience, then the boundary between inner and outer becomes less absolute. We often imagine that inner mental life is private, and outer reality is objective, and that relations are imposed by the mind on an otherwise neutral world. James proposes a different picture. Experience is the common stuff, and relations are within that stuff. Subject and object are later names for roles within experience, not two separate substances. The reality of relations supports a more continuous ontology, which is why radical empiricism is radical. It expands what empiricism is willing to count as real. In modern terms, you can see why this is attractive to certain approaches in philosophy of mind and cognitive science that emphasize continuity, embodied meaning, and context. But it is important not to force James into contemporary categories. His point remains fundamentally descriptive. If you describe experience honestly, you find relations in it. If you then build a theory that denies the reality of relations, your theory will be out of contact with the phenomenon it claims to explain. The deeper philosophical payoff is that many classical problems arise from treating relations as secondary. If relations are not real, then we must explain how disconnected elements become connected, how knowledge reaches the world, how meaning emerges from mere sensation. James suspects that these puzzles are partly artifacts of a mistaken starting point. If we begin with experience that already includes connections, then the world does not need to be artificially glued together by an extra faculty. The glue is already there, in the experienced continuity of life. So when James says relations are real, he is making a disciplined claim about what counts as data. Experience includes not only things, but also transitions, linkages, and felt directions. A psychology and philosophy that wants to understand consciousness as a stream must treat those relations as part of reality, not as optional decorations. And once you accept that, radical empiricism becomes less mysterious. It is simply empiricism that refuses to throw away half of what is given.